Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today, I want to take you to the Caribbean Sea near Jamaica on a January day in 1863. Look out across the horizon, and we see a sleek Confederate raider. It's the Alabama steaming towards the island. She presented an extraordinary sight. A portion of her sleek top deck had been transformed into an outdoor hospital ward. Underneath the canvas tops, sick and wounded men breathing fresh ocean air from comfortable cots, protected from those sun rays by that temporary canvas sheet that was erected aboard the deck, top of the deck. Everyone aboard was ordered to keep noise to a minimum so as not to disturb the patients. Perhaps the most unusual aspect of that deck arrangement was that the patients weren't Confederates. They were Union prisoners of war. They were too ill to move, and the Confederate captors kept a close eye on them. This makeshift hospital on top of the deck of the Alabama was the result of the efforts of one man, one prisoner, and he's pictured here in the dark uniform. He's the surgeon, and his name is Edward Sylvester Matthews, the prisoner of war surgeon. Until very recently, Matthews and his fellow captives had served on a Union warship, the Hatteras. It was an iron-hulled side-wheel steamer. The ship and crew had racked up a number of blockade runner captures along the coast of Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. Matthews, a Pennsylvania-born man, had offered his services to the Navy soon after the war began. He had some good creds as a doctor, an 1860 graduate of Columbian College in Washington, D.C. He received an appointment as assistant surgeon in July of 1861, just a few months after the war started, and was assigned to the crew of the Hatteras, his first assignment for duty in the West Gulf Blockade Squadron. He had the good fortune to serve with two of the Navy's top commanders, George Pop Emmons, who was an explorer, an author, and a seasoned veteran who captured or destroyed 46 enemy ships and blockade runners during the war. Emmons, left the Hatteras in November of 1862 and was replaced by Lieutenant Commander Homer C. Blake. Blake was a gallant 40-year-old career officer. He was actually old enough to be the father of Matthews and many of the 125 members of the Hatteras' crew. A few months after Blake assumed command, the Hatteras joined an armada assembled off the Texas coast. It was on January 6th of 1863. That armada was led by Rear Admiral David Farragut. He actually left with the flotilla in an operation to capture the port of Galveston. 5 days earlier, on New Year's Day, the city of Galveston fell to rebel forces and subdued the federal garrison. The Hatteras lay at anchor with the fleet outside Galveston on the afternoon of January 11th, when a signal arrived from Farragut's flagship, the Brooklyn. An unknown sail had been spotted on the horizon off in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Hatteras was ordered to give chase. Lieutenant Commander Blake reacted. Here's what he had to say. Quote, "I got underway immediately and steamed with all speed in the direction indicated." This is what Blake said in his after-action report. Quote, "I continued the chase and rapidly gained upon the suspicious vessel. Knowing the slow rate of speed of the Hatteras, I at once suspected that deception was being practiced, and hence ordered the ship to be cleared for action with everything in readiness for determined attack and vigorous defense." End quote. Officers and crew scrambled into position. Surgeon Matthews, likely took his place below decks in the sick bay of the Hatteras. Blake continues his narrative, quote, when within 4 miles of the vessel, I observed that she had ceased to steam and was lying broadside on, awaiting us. It was nearly 7 o'clock and quite dark, but notwithstanding the obscurity of the night, I felt assured from the general character of the vessel and her maneuvering that I should soon encounter the rebel steamer Alabama, end quote. Blake, of course, was correct. The Alabama and her wily commander, Raphael Semmes, were a legend already in the war. The Maryland-born captain drew the Hatteras into the open sea, confident of victory. Outgunned, outmanned, and outmaneuvered, Blake brought the Hatteras in close and searched for an early opportunity to board the Alabama and capture her crew. Of course, Blake is trying to take the offense, trying to strike that first blow. Blake says, quote, I came within easy speaking range about 75 yards away, and upon asking, what steamer is that? Received the answer, Her Britannic Majesty's ship Vixen. I replied that I would send a boat aboard and immediately gave the order. In the meantime, both vessels were changing their positions, the stranger endeavoring to gain a desirable position for a raking fire. Almost simultaneously, with the piping away of the boat, the strange craft again replied, quote, we are the Confederate steamer Alabama, which was accompanied by a broadside. The Hatteras returned fire and closed to within 30 yards. Musket and pistol shots mixed with cannon fire from both vessels. Suddenly, the gunners of the Alabama struck with deadly accuracy. One shell tore into the Hatteras amidship and set fire to the hold. Almost simultaneously, a second shell ripped through the sickbay, concussing Matthews and exploding in an adjacent room, setting it ablaze. A third shell mortally wounded the Hatteras when it struck and disabled her engine cylinder. Deprived of power to maneuver or operate the pumps, the Hatteras sat effectively dead in the water. Still, Lieutenant Commander Blake fought on, quote, with the vessel on fire in 2 places and beyond human power, a hopeless wreck upon the water, I still maintained an active fire with a double hope of disabling the Alabama and of attracting the attention of the fleet off Galveston, which was only 25 miles distant. At this point, Blake learned that more shells had struck the Hatteras below the waterline and that the ship was rapidly taking on water. Opposite, on board the Alabama, Semmes signaled with an offer to assist the doomed crew. Blake, by this point, realized that the game was up. He accepted Semmes' offer, and he said, quote, I felt that I had no right to sacrifice uselessly and without any desirable result the lives of all under my command, end quote. The crew of the Hatteras was rescued, including Matthews. 2 of their number, both African-American sailors, were lost with the ship. Southerners reacted with jubilation when they received news of the Alabama's victory. The Hatteras was sent, quote, where Semmes loves to send Yankee ships and where there is ample anchorage for more of them, end quote. The Charleston Daily Courier boasted. That, of course, is to the bottom of the ocean. Meanwhile, in the North, they made the best of a tough loss. The newspaper, the New York Herald, noted, quote, the gallant little Hatteras died game and showed her pluck to the last. For 20 minutes, she sustained and returned the raking fire of her huge antagonist and at last went down under the gallant Blake with her guns still speaking and the old flag flying from the peak. Meanwhile, Semmes and the Alabama steamed toward the Jamaican port of Kingston. According to one report, Semmes minutely superintended everything in connection with the movements of the prisoners himself. And our gallant officers and soldiers found themselves, for the first time in their lives, treading the decks of a real pirate ship as prisoners, and that ship manned by their own countrymen in arms against the flag which had proudly waved from the mastheads in every part of the civilized globe. They looked aloft and saw the rebel emblem flying, when the sailor's heart, which is always open to the tenderest emotions of patriotic ardor, beat high with indignation at the thoughts that he was compelled to live, for the time being, under the bastard rag of a bastard Confederacy. End quote. More, another quote, with regard to the treatment which they received during their entire stay aboard the Alabama, the officers and men of the Hatteras, without an exception, speak in terms of eulogy. Every comfort was provided for them, and the strictest attention paid to their every little want. End quote. This is a tribute to Semmes. Matthews would have been particularly pleased. His suggestions for the care of the wounded and sick were adopted. Semmes listened. Matthews also had ample medicine available from the Alabama's well-stocked supplies. Long story short, the sick and wounded men under Matthews' care prospered under the protection of good medicine and that makeshift hospital on board the deck. Semmes eventually paroled the Hatteras crew at Kingston and left them there. Semmes went on to raid Union vessels for more than a year. The Alabama's reign in the high seas came to an end on June 19, 1864, when the Union sloop of war Kearsarge sunk her off the coast of Cherbourg, France. Lieutenant Commander Blake, Surgeon Matthews, and their shipmates checked in with the U.S. consul in Kingston before journeying home via Key West, Florida. They arrived in New York City on February 25th, 1863, and obeyed their paroles until formally exchanged. Blake went on to distinguish himself in military operations along the James River in Virginia, and remained in the Navy after the end of the war. He died in 1880 on active duty with the rank of Commodore. Matthews suffered a very different fate. He suffered from chronic neuralgia from the concussion he received in the fight with the Alabama that was on board the Hatteras in the Gulf of Mexico outside Galveston. But he continued in the service despite his illness. In December 1864, he was assigned to the sloop of war San Jacinto. During the pre-dawn hours of New Year's Day 1865, near the Bahamian island of Great Abaco, the vessel wrecked on a reef off Green Turtle Cay, an experience that exacerbated his neuralgia. Navy authorities concerned for Matthews' health granted him a leave of absence. He went to Providence, Rhode Island, and married Mary Elliott. It was a woman that he had met shortly before he joined the crew of the San Jacinto. After the wedding, he received orders to report to Key West. While there, Matthews suffered from bouts of yellow fever and malaria, which further weakened his already precarious health. Matthews returned to Providence in May 1865 and came home in charge of a nurse. He was so feeble when he arrived, this is Mary's remembrance, quote, that he had to be assisted upstairs, and I do not think he had good health after that. There was scarcely a day that he did not have to take some medicine to relieve himself from the neuralgic pains, end quote. Mary administered the medicine herself. That medicine was morphine, and she administered it in increasingly larger doses, completely unaware that the drug was an opiate and highly addictive. By the time she discovered the truth about the drug, Matthews was completely addicted. Mary later stated, I, having read up on a book about the opium habit, commenced to try to cure him myself, and my desire to substitute a less evil for the greater, advised him to take chloroform by inhaling it in order to get relief from the pain. The effect was terrible, she said, for the chloroform finally made him a raving maniac and so disturbed him that he had such a craving for it that it was dangerous to even be about the house with him. End quote. Now, he was trapped in a downward spiral of our narcotic dependency, marked by occasional episodes of lucidity, during which he attempted to break free from the morphine addiction. That addiction eventually cost him his Navy career. With few options left, Mary took the advice of her father and committed Matthews to an asylum. Her father accompanied Matthews on an overnight trip to a facility on August 15th, 1881. They stopped at a hotel where her father stepped away for just a few minutes. Matthews drifted away from the hotel and ingested a lethal dose of morphine from a bottle that he had either procured or hidden away, carrying it with him. A policeman found him against a fence, apparently ill in some sort of a stupor, and offered aid. Matthews collapsed. He was transported to a hospital unconscious, and he died later that night, 12:35 a.m. at age 41. There was a note in his pension file that attributes his death to that concussion he suffered in the fight with the Alabama. He's pictured here in 1867, during somewhat happier times, still suffering from neuralgia, but not yet completely addicted. The two men with him, one of them is a Marine lieutenant seated on the left. His name is Charles Allen Stillman. And on the right, a Navy paymaster, Charles E. Boggs. So there you have it, the tragic story of Matthews, of William Matthews, surgeon of the Hatteras, and his tragic addiction to morphine, the result of neuralgia suffered from his war service. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.